Hello, I'm Nicole France, Vice President and Principal Analyst covering all things customer experience here at Constellation Research.
And I'm Doug Henshin, VP and Principal Analyst covering data to decisions. And welcome to episode 11 of Constellation Research TV. As usual, we'll be talking about enterprise news and trends. But who's joining us on the show this week, Nicole?
Well, Doug, after you and I do a rundown of the latest news, we'll be joined by Constellation's resident expert on all things privacy, Steve Wilson, who's going to take us through the somewhat controversial topic of digital proof of vaccination. Looking forward to that one. Always thought-provoking. Then we'll be joined, Liz Miller and I will talk through some of our recent research just published on digital optimization and a new system and set of tools for thinking about that. And finally, you and I will come back and recap all the many events that seem to be going on at the moment.
Yes, it's conference season. But before we get to all that, let's talk about the news. Starting with last week's epic earnings reports from AWS, Microsoft, Google, all three of which notched double-digit gains in revenue. AWS sales, I should say, Amazon sales were up double digits. AWS specifically up 32% to $13.5 billion on the quarter. Microsoft Cloud revenue, including Office 365 and Azure, up 33% to $17.1 billion. They don't really break out Azure revenue specifically, but that's said to be up 50%. Google Cloud sales were up 45% to $4.1 billion. So these companies are accelerating amid the pandemic. It's really part of the larger tech and digital upswing we've seen through the pandemic. Alphabet, Amazon, Apple, Microsoft, and Facebook putting a larger emphasis point on that these five firms now get as much revenue in 1 week as McDonald's makes all year.
It's astonishing.
Yeah.
It really is.
Yeah. And Amazon, I read, is now it was 1/15th the size it is today back in 2009. Amazing.
Well, the fascinating thing is these companies were on a pretty solid trajectory, all of them, before the pandemic. And if anything, they've just had more oxygen to fuel the fire. I mean, it's been an amazing growth trajectory. And a lot of it is coming from multiple areas. So Amazon obviously benefiting from the huge move to commerce, not just B2C, because there's an awful lot of B2B stuff that's sold on Amazon these days as well. And that's before we get to, as you pointed out, Doug, AWS being a huge growth driver as all kinds of businesses figured out they really needed to be moving more into the cloud, more significantly and certainly more quickly than many of them had. Same with Google. So big beneficiaries there. And let's not forget on the Microsoft side, Teams. I mean, it seems to be the byword of the pandemic. If it's not Zoom, it's Teams. So big changes there. Speaking of Microsoft, that really is big news this week because we've got the Microsoft Business Applications Summit. Not so heavy on the news front as Microsoft Ignite was not all that long ago. It seems like we got all the big announcements really to do with particularly a lot of the Dynamics portfolio at Microsoft Ignite. This really seems to be more of a discussion about where Microsoft stands in the business applications market. And it's interesting because it's pretty clear that the competitive sights are set on Salesforce.
Yeah, I didn't see much news in the event so much as positioning. There was an announcement in MySpace, a new goals feature for Power BI. Think of it as sort of a general purpose performance management, the kind you see in a corporate performance management or a financial performance management or a human capital management system. The analytics are there to tell you what happened and why. Well, goals are there to tell you what should happen. This is what we think is good. This is what we think is bad. This is acceptable. This is unacceptable. It's pretty basic what they introduced today, but they say they've got hierarchy and cascading coming. So you can do things like cascade down goals, make sure they're aligned with corporate strategy. but they're not going to be competing with CPM systems or HCM systems.
It is interesting, though. I like this focus, and we talked about it with Domo as well, on actually how to interpret and present data. So it's not just how to read a chart, but what should you take away from this? What's good? How far are you away from that? And what do you need to do to get there? So interesting data interpretation, which I think we're going to see a lot more of. Interesting to compare Microsoft Business Applications or Business BizApp Summit to Adobe Summit, which happened not too long ago. I would say Adobe Summit far, far heavier on the new announcements. In fact, there was a wall of them. It was quite a lot to get through. I think the overall summary for me on that one was much more focused on rationalizing the portfolio. I think Adobe still has a significant distance to go to really do that in a way that makes sense from the enterprise user standpoint, but a big step in the right direction nonetheless, making sense of all the various pieces, how they fit together. And that's a combination of things that have been acquired over time, as well as some of the new developments Adobe's been investing in. Some particularly big ones like asset management and the light version, Assets Essentials, which I think is going to be very appealing on the digital asset side, and also things like the real-time CDP. And as much as I hate the name CDP, I absolutely give a lot of plaudits to Adobe for focusing on tackling that great big issue of getting customer data right. So interesting contrast.
Tied to that data point, I think Adobe does a really good job. I mean, it's kind of under the hood. You don't hear about it too much, but I've seen it up close. They do a really good job with the the metadata management, the cataloging, the governance of data, surprisingly deep, policy enforcement capabilities, cataloging capabilities, really good stuff to see from a vendor that's focused in the customer data management, even though you'd see that sort of thing in full-blown data management circles these days. So good on them.
Yeah, I guess the one final summary I'd make on those is comparing Adobe Summit to Adobe Max, which happened earlier in the year, and Microsoft BizApp Summit compared to Ignite earlier in the year. The second time around, not as much energy and not as much fun.
Huh. Well, a lot of energy came out this week on Monday when it was announced that Dell is selling Boomi for a whopping $4 billion to TPG and Francisco Partners, private equity firms. That's a big increase over its acquisition cost way back in 2010. Seeing a lot of hot and happening activity in the iPaaS space. I hear about automation every other day this year. Boomi has some 15,000 customers, so obviously a really important player. And I think they've been on the sidelines preparing for this move. I mean, the handwriting was on the wall. You saw them very clearly take Dell out of all their branding, very specifically focused Boomi to become an independent. And I think this is an important opportunity for them to step up the investment in a time when we're seeing, consolidation and energy for new combinations within the iPaaS space. I think that's going to be really interesting.
Yeah, and I guess the big point of contrast there is just at about the same time we hear that news, we've also got Verizon unloading Yahoo and AOL for about $5 billion. The big difference there is bought at peak and really just trying to dump it for, I think, what they can get. Not to say that $5 billion is anything to sniff at, but a little bit of contrast to Dell's investment strategy with Boomi.
Yeah, we'll see if, who picks that up a few years down the road and makes a silk spurs out of what might be perceived by Verizon to be a sow's ear. Anyways, they've got bigger fish to fry in their pursuit of 5G and whatever else comes next.
And speaking of big fish to fry, not to mention subjects of some considerable discussion and debate, let's turn to Steve Wilson and hear a little bit more about what is happening with digital proof of vaccination. I mean, we've only just started to hear about this. It's undoubtedly going to be a subject that becomes more prominent as we move into a world where more and more people are vaccinated, but still not everyone. And let's face it, many of us are, Ray, itching to get back on a plane again. So Steve, let's hear.